I'm actually surprised. I thought this engine would be not as fuel efficient as that Ford Ranger. Turns out I was wrong. Welcome back, I'm Alex, and today we're going to see what kind of real-world fuel economy you can expect out of the best-selling mid-size truck, none other than the 4th-gen Toyota Tacoma with the brand new 2.4-liter turbo 4-banger, baby. Well, here she is. If you guys remember, we did have a Trail Hunter Tacoma on the channel very recently, but I wanted to wait till we get a quote-unquote normal Tacoma to do a fuel economy run and towing. As you guys can see, we have some normal tires, normal ride height. This is a TRD Sport, I believe, and with that you get this fancy looking hood scoop, which is not functionable. I think it's just a piece of plastic kind of just glued onto the hood here. We also get this massive chin splitter, so hopefully it's going to help with our fuel economy today. I do actually like how these 4th-gen Tacomas look. I think the front end is pretty sharp, but you guys can let me know how you think about that. And as I talked with the Trail Hunter, these new Tacomas are seemingly pretty large trucks, almost as big as a full-size truck. At least it's kind of what it looks like. I mean, even in a lineup of basically full-size trucks, the Tacoma doesn't really stand out as anything really smaller than some of these bigger quote-unquote full-size trucks. It's just a pretty large platform at this point. With the bigger size comes some advantages. You can get a 6-foot bed in these Tacomas, and I was able to fit 2 kayaks in here, which you just don't really expect out of a mid-sized truck. Today with us, we have the non-hybrid 2.4-liter turbo engine, which I think most people will probably end up buying, and I'm expecting pretty big things out of this engine. I reviewed this engine top to bottom when I had that Tacoma Trail Hunter on the channel, and it was pretty obvious that Toyota was really trying to increase fuel economy as well as reduce emissions and potentially sacrificing some reliability and longevity to get there. This non-hybrid iForce engine puts out 278 horsepower, 317 pound-feet of torque out of a dual overhead cam, dual injection 4-banger setup. Somewhat complex if I'm going to be honest, but that's just the way modern engines are these days. And the EPA officially rates it at 21 miles per gallon for this engine and truck combination, 19 in the city and 24 miles per gallon on the highway, which we will 100% be testing out today. We will also be doing a direct comparison between this truck and one of my favorites, probably the truck I like most in the segment, the Ford Ranger with the 2.7-liter Ecoboost. A couple months ago, I put that truck on my 85-mile fuel economy loop, which consists of 3 sections, city, country, and highway, to ideally give us a fair combined fuel economy score. So I'm really excited to see how this top-selling Tacoma fares against that Ford Ranger. Well, it's time to hit the gas station. We'll see you there. Well, we're full of fuel and we've reset our fuel economy, so let's get her started. First up, the city, baby. On our city section, I try to keep the truck around 35 miles an hour, obviously traffic depending. We got a stoplight up here. But typically what we see with these smaller displacement turbo engines is they perform very well in terms of fuel economy in the city, and we have an advantage with this engine specifically to our comparison today because it is a 2.4-liter displacement engine versus 2.7, so that smaller displacement should give us an advantage right away. That's not the only advantage. This 4-banger is a heavily undersquared engine, rubbing shoulders with engines like the 6.7-liter Cummins in terms of undersquareness. Having a heavy undersquare engine typically gives a better thermal efficiency. In fact, this engine has the best thermal efficiency of any engine in the segment. What that essentially means is the engine can transfer the energy of the fuel into mechanical energy at a much more efficient rate, and this should save us some fuel. Secondly, with a heavily undersquared engine, we get a rather large stroke, and this means that we can generate torque extremely well and easily, especially down low in the RPM range. So it means we don't have to rev as high when we are, let's say, stopping or starting, taking a turn here, and trying to accelerate the vehicle. We can rely on that long stroke to provide that really good torque low in the RPM range, in comparison to the 2.7 liter Ecoboost, which is a square engine, does not have that heavy torque advantage low in the RPM band. For example, this engine makes its peak torque at 1700 RPM, where the 2.7 liter makes its peak torque at 2700 RPM. So again, in theory, when we are stopping and starting in the city, this engine should not have to rev as high, which should save us some fuel. Another advantage that this engine has over its predecessors or older engines, let's say, is Toyota really focused on improving the internal friction of the engine, or reducing the internal friction of the engine, going with thin, low tension piston rings, variable displacement oil pump, low viscosity oil, as well as going to electric cooling fans, all of which is going to reduce the internal friction of the engine, and that is going to make the engine more efficient, again, saving us some fuel. As we leave the city here, we are averaging 25.3 miles per gallon, which is a little bit less than the Ecoboost. That was averaging 26.2, miles per gallon. One thing to remember, this is just what the computer or the computed value is. We will be doing the real hand-calculated math at the end of our run, so fear not. We're now in our country section where I put the truck in cruise control, 56 miles an hour, 90 kilometers an hour, and we just sort of let the truck do its thing. Now, on this stretch of country road, it's rather hilly, and it's always interesting to see what these engines, what these trucks do, whether they downshift, whether they shove more boost in the engine. And I suspect that with this engine having its peak torque so down low in the RPM band, 1700 RPM, that we're not going to need to use as much boost, downshift as often. We can just rely on that heavy undersquare engine, that large stroke, to give us the torque we need to get over these smaller little hills. The 2.7 liter Ecoboost is quite a bit more powerful than this engine, putting down 315 horsepower, 400 pound-feet of torque in the Ford Ranger application. Gotta stop myself there, because you can clearly see the peak torque on the Ford Ranger for the 2.7 is not 2700 RPM. It's a little bit above that. Now, I do know the 2.7 liter in the F-150 does make its peak torque quite a bit lower, and both of those engines are slightly tuned differently, most obvious by the lower horsepower rating in the Ford Ranger, so my fault there. You would like to see that this engine comes in as the more fuel-efficient engine, because it simply is not as powerful, but I've seen crazier things happen on this fuel economy loop. So in terms of driveline, we do have some advantages and disadvantages behind our 2.4 liter engine. We have the 8-speed ACEN transmission with 8 gears. Now, on a side note, you can get this engine with a 6-speed manual in 2025, which is pretty much unheard of at this point. But with only 8 gears in this automatic transmission, it does put us at a slight disadvantage in the segment, because, well, the Ford Ranger comes with a 10-speed transmission, as well as the Nissan Titan coming with a 9-speed transmission, so that could impact our fuel economy a little bit. Despite the Ford Ranger today having an advantage in the transmission with 2 extra gears, this truck has an advantage when it comes to axle ratio. This truck comes with an axle ratio of 3/58. Every Tacoma with the 8-speed automatic transmission comes with this gear ratio, where the Ford Ranger comes with 373s, which is a bit more of an aggressive gear set, and certainly going to be a downside when it comes to fuel economy. So with our less aggressive gear set with this Tacoma, we have some pros as well as potentially some disadvantages with 2 less gears in the transmission. Another thing that can significantly impact fuel economy is weight. And despite this being a mid-sized truck, this thing, it's a big vehicle, and with this configuration comes in at a curb weight of around 4,600 pounds, encroaching on 5,000 pounds of weight, which is creeping up to the weight of a full-sized pickup truck. So it is going to become harder and harder for manufacturers to make these mid-sized trucks efficient, because they're getting bigger and bigger. They're on a bulking diet, if you will, over the years. So you can see we got a little hill here, and we'll see our boost come up. So not only did we shove boost in the engine, we actually downshifted as well. And that's where we're going to be losing fuel economy on this country section through these little hills here. We're just about to finish our country section, currently sitting at 24.5 miles per gallon. Not terrible at all. The 2.7 liter Ecoboost finished, I believe, with 24.3 miles per gallon on that section. Again, what the computers have generated for us. So all in all, pretty even if I'm gonna be honest. And I guess it comes down to this highway section. And I'm very interested to see what happens with this small displacement turbo engine. Jumping onto the highway here, we'll gingerly make our way up to 70 miles an hour, and we'll put the truck back in cruise control once again. 70 miles an hour as we come back into town. And typically, this is where we see the smaller displacement turbocharged engines sort of fall off. And this is, I believe, the smallest engine we've actually tested on this fuel economy loop. My theory as to why this happens is because these smaller displacement engines can't fall back on their displacement. Instead, when we're at 70 miles an hour with all this increased wind resistance, as well as going over these hills, we are at the tip of the Appalachian Mountains. The turbo needs to spool up and push more air into the engine, therefore making enough power and torque to keep us at 70 miles an hour. And that's fine. But what comes with that is increased fuel as well. Internal combustion gasoline engines like to run at a very specific air-fuel mixture ratio, also known as a stoichiometric ratio. I believe it's like 14.1 or 14.2 to 1, and that allows these engines to run at their most efficient capacity, delivering the most power as well as fuel economy all in the same bout. But when we slap a turbo on here, and when this turbo is pushing more air or oxygen into the engine, that extra air needs to be met with extra fuel in order to maintain that ratio. So when this engine is in boost going over hills to maintain speed, keep those wheels turning, this engine also needs to feed more fuel into it. So that's what I'm talking about. So you can see we have a little bit of a ridge or a hill coming up here, and I'm intrigued to see what our boost gauge reads as we go over that hill. So we're getting to the base, and right away, you guys can see we are starting to push some boost. There we go. Be nice to have actually a number of what kind of PSI we're pushing versus just a graph, but yeah, you guys can see we're pushing a good amount of boost into this engine to get over this ridge, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. And sustained boost, which is exactly what we're seeing right now, typically means sustained increased fuel economy. You guys can see we've already dropped to 23.6, almost losing already at 1 mile per gallon, and we're just getting started on the highway here. As we're just about to come off the highway here, we're finished with 23.6 miles per gallon, a little bit less than the Ecoboost, but still very much neck and neck. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when we do some math. All right, there's our first bump, 11.9 liters. Give it 30 seconds, we'll go again. 2, 1. .401 liters. After crunching some numbers, this Toyota Tacoma finished with 25.4 miles per gallon, which is quite a bit more than what the computer actually told us. And more importantly, that is a better fuel economy rating than the 2.7 liter Ecoboost in the Ford Ranger, which I'm actually surprised. I thought this engine would be not as fuel efficient as that Ford Ranger. Turns out I was wrong. Either way, both of those engines are relatively close in terms of fuel economy, so you're not going to go wrong with either or if you are really concerned about fuel economy. I am looking to tow with this truck, not today, but later in the week. So the 2.4 liter i4s took the cake when it came to fuel economy, but when it comes to towing, is this 4-banger turbo going to be able to compete with the very powerful 2.7 liter Ecoboost, which I think is a fantastic towing engine? And when I towed with the Ford Ranger, it performed very well towing my 5,000-pound enclosed trailer. So I'm excited to see what happens when we get a load behind this engine and truck. So look forward to that. Anyways, fellas, as I always say, Let me know what you guys think if you own one of these 4th Gen Tacomas. I like hearing from real world owners. What kind of fuel economy are you getting? Are you happy with it? And if you did like the video, don't forget to leave that thumbs up. If you like cool stuff like this, do not forget to subscribe because we'd like to have you on board. Anyways, enough of me. We'll see you in the next freaking video.